Tonight, a court grants an injunction to halt the province's pronoun and naming policy. And in response, the Premier vows to recall the Legislative Assembly and use the notwithstanding clause to veto the judge's ruling. Also, for years, she was simply known as Indian Girl 237. But after 2 years of extensive research, we identify the girl who died at a residential school. She's from Saskatchewan, and we know her real name.
This is CBC Saskatchewan News.
It is Thursday, September 28th, and the CBC Saskatchewan News starts right now. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. A Court of King's Bench judge has granted an injunction to halt the Saskatchewan government's new pronoun policy. It requires students under 16 to get parental consent if they want to go by a different name or pronoun at school. But now, Premier Scott Moe is vowing to use the notwithstanding clause to keep the policy in place. Adam Hunter has the latest.
Premier Scott Moe released a statement vowing to recall the legislature early to protect his government's controversial new policy. It requires students under the age of 16 to receive parental permission to use their chosen name or pronoun in school. Moe says in 2 weeks his government will use the notwithstanding clause of the Canadian Constitution to pass legislation to protect the policy. On the decision by the judge, Moe says, "Our government is extremely dismayed by the judicial overreach of the court, blocking implementation of the parental inclusion and consent policy. The default position should never be to keep a child's information from their parents." The decision by Justice Michael McGaugh calls for a temporary halt to the implementation and enforcement of the province's naming and pronoun policy until a decision is made on its constitutionality. In his decision, the judge says he is convinced that children under 16 who are unable to have their name, pronouns, gender diversity, or gender identity observed in school will suffer irreparable harm. That acknowledgement feels like a victory to the UR Pride Center.
I was elated. I was so excited. I'm so happy to know that the court is acknowledging this for what it is, and that this is, potentially harmful for the trans community and for all kids.
The opposition NDP is calling for the government to scrap the policy, while the Canadian Civil Liberties Association says the use of the notwithstanding clause proves that the government believes its policy is unconstitutional. The Civil Liberties Association says the use of the clause against students' rights is unconscionable. Adam Hunter, CBC News, Regina.
Events are getting underway as we get closer to the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. This morning, there was a community smudge walk at the First Nations University of Canada. The annual Smudge Walk honors residential school survivors and the children who never returned home. This year's walk attracted the biggest crowd yet.
It brings a sense of warmth, if you will. I don't know if you understand that, but it's encouraging as well. It brings good feelings.
All educational institutions should lead and engage in events like this because our educational system historically, and perhaps even some ways today through systemic racism, and have engaged in and contributed to the exclusion of Indigenous peoples.
The president of the First Nations University says it's important to take part in these events to learn about the legacy of residential schools and the resiliency of survivors. Some of those who are making a real effort to learn more are newcomers to our province. Laura Sharpoletti has more.
Childhood photos of a life before landing in Canada. These bring back memories for Victoria Flores of all the time she spent as a little girl with the Indigenous peoples of Bolivia. She is part Indigenous herself, and when she immigrated to Regina at age 16, she was troubled to hear the way people talked about Indigenous people here.
I hadn't even met an Indigenous person at that point, but I would just heard so many awful things. And I was annoyed because, again, I saw similar things back home where people would just stereotype Indigenous people in different ways because the history is different. Here is a picture of myself.
In high school in Regina, Flores threw herself into learning about equality, and she thought about Indigenous peoples here versus back in Bolivia.
The history of Indigenous people in Bolivia, there was a lot of awful things done through colonization, but it wasn't like here where people were taken from their families and culture was stripped and they were forced to be away from their parents and all these things that give you this sense of identity.
Before Fayan Lam moved to Regina from Hong Kong last year, she took an online course to learn about Indigenous people in Canada. She says she relates to the desire to reclaim a native language.
Like, even I am Chinese, but my mother language is Cantonese. Yes, and I think after I come to Canada, I realized that self-identity is really important. I want my children also know Chinese.
It's part of my responsibility to not only know and understand the history, but also be able to contribute to a better community.
Both Lam and Flores want to learn more about truth and reconciliation efforts. Laura Sharpaletti, CBC News, Regina.
A 160-year-old eagle feather staff has been returned to Poundmaker Cree Nation. The curator of Chief Poundmaker Museum received the staff from a donor in Saskatoon who didn't want to be named publicly. Floyd Favel brought it to the CBC studio before taking it back to the community. He says the staff dates back to the 1860s. This photo from 1935 shows the last time it was used ceremonially to commemorate the Battle of Cut Knife Hill. Favel says it symbolizes bravery.
Giving your life for your people, and to be brave, and to be honorable, truthful. So by it coming back to our community, and for everybody who comes and watches it, sees it, any people, Indigenous or not, that's what they will see. And that's what the lesson they will get.
Favel says a non-Indigenous couple had the staff. The husband loved Indigenous history, but after he passed away, his widow decided to return the item to the First Nation as a gift from her heart. Reconciliation can take many forms. At an elite hockey program in Saskatoon, it's about creating opportunities for Indigenous youth. It's called the Indigenous Sports Academy, and it's fostering excellence on and off the ice.
The Northern Town versus your home team, the
That's the end goal, is we're putting out future leaders and people that are going to contribute in a positive way in the future to society. Courage Bears, founding director and director of hockey operations for the academy. So it's U17 prep, and we play in the Canadian Sports School Hockey League. It's a league that, it's first and foremost allows kids to pursue their outside passion, but it also combines education with academics. And of course, we all know how important education is, and as well as this personal development for the athlete.
I'm Dan Thomas, left winger, number 10, Indigenous Sports Academy. I'm from Chapaways First Nation. Go to school in the morning, but if we have morning practice, then we're usually on the ice around 8, done by 9, so we usually go for class, and then our classes kind of switch. So afternoon goes to morning, and then morning goes to afternoon.
Johnson Jack, goalie, number 31, plays for Indigenous Sports Academy. Being able to represent my people and the native culture, I guess, and who my people are. Being able to represent is really what I liked about it is that's you never hear of an Indigenous Sports Academy or academy anywhere. So I was I want to be a part of that.
Greg Slavotin, head coach of the U17 hockey program. The program's all about, giving them opportunity, and I'm a firm believer, the way I run my teams is, honest hockey players, what we're trying to build, but more importantly, honest person. And so the off-ice aspect to the program is very, very important.
We billet them in Saskatoon, and they come from primarily Western Canada. It's one of our mandates of the program is that we have all Indigenous kids, so we have First Nation and Métis kids, so from all over.
Oh yeah, my family actually right over there. They have a sign and stuff going. They all love this. There's a whole 20 of them over here. This season, improve as much as I can, try to get onto a junior team. It's really all, just try to improve and get as best as I can.
Just to get better and, grow as a player, help my teammates out, be a good teammate, and just have lots of fun.
We all have a role in trying to bring people together, I think, and that's just, if hockey can help do that, then I think we're helping a little bit in some small way.
We don't talk about winning, ever. It's all about the process and just becoming a better person every time we're out.
Reconciliation, we use the term a lot, and I think if we can facilitate and play a role and be a positive outlet for our athletes, would also be a positive image for the Indigenous community, and that's a part of our goal.
As we start seeing more events and acknowledgements ahead of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, a girl whose identity was lost to time has been found. An official list of children who died at residential schools has many incorrect names and even numbers. One was Indian Girl 237. Thanks to extensive work from reporter Brian Enius, now we know she was from Saskatchewan and we know her name. We'll share her story with you after the break. There is a lot that isn't known about the children who died in residential schools. The National Center for Truth and Reconciliation has a list of names, but it's far from complete. In some cases, there's only a number, including Indian Girl 237. Our Brian Enius with CBC Indigenous set out to correct that. We now know she was from Saskatchewan, and we know her name.
It's 50 meters long. Printed on it are roughly 2,800 names. The National Student Memorial Register is a visual and tangible way for the world to grasp how many kids died at Canada's residential schools. But there are at least two numbers, not names, numbers. Maybe you remember reading about Indian Girl 237 in the news. The name, if we can even call it that, almost perfectly captures just how cold and cruel the residential school system was with children and their names. But what is the story behind the girl and how she was remembered as just a number? And who does she belong to? The harms and atrocities committed against Indigenous people inside Canada's residential school system are well documented. Among those harms, a legacy of erasure by these so-called schools. Some children were given more anglicized names, while others were given nothing more than numbers. And that's caused a lot of problems for those seeking answers and looking to memorialize loved ones who never came home. In order to find Indian Girl 237's name, it meant months of research, cross-referencing community records and digging through federal archives, which included hundreds of documents like school summary reports, correspondences between school and government officials and families, and death certificates and death reports. With confidence, we know Indian Girl 237 is Letitia John. This document is how we know. It summarizes treaty payments made to a family in White Bear. Back in 1897 or 1898 in White Bear First Nation in modern-day Saskatchewan, a woman named Pahi gave birth to a girl named Letitia. She was given the last name John, her father's first name. And as part of the Indian Act custom of the day, Letitia would be given a number, her father's treaty number, 237. That's what Indian agents would use to track John and his family in different ways. This same document shows that when Letitia was 5 or 6 years old, she was taken from her family and registered at the Capel Industrial School in LeBret, Saskatchewan, almost 150 kilometers away, and assigned student number 0235. Whether or not Letitia was referred to as only a number while at the institution isn't clear from the documents we reviewed, but changing her name administratively was a common practice, and one that finds its roots in a sinister motive.
It creates this sort of profound destabilizing effect, which is exactly what federal Indian policy was trying to do: destabilize, undercut, and replace Indigenous cultures to support the process of colonization. And so naming became a powerful site of this struggle over policy and direction.
Letitia died in 1912 from tuberculosis. The disease was deemed a crisis in the schools in Canada, caused in part by poor construction and ventilation. It killed half of those who died in the institutions, and tuberculosis was particularly intense on the prairies when Letitia was alive. Despite that, in 1912, the year she died, the principal wrote the health of students was good, sanitary precautions were taken, contagious diseases were isolated, and ventilation was attended to. Taking away children's names was the first step in the institutional process of cultural eradication, Carleton says. But it disconnected families in numerous ways, including making it nearly impossible for some families to find out what exactly happened to their dead children. And it's impacting our understanding of the institutions today, too.
It makes it very difficult to go back into the records and find out, who's who, where did they attend, for how long. All of these complications in the records makes it very difficult to understand survivors' experience.
In 2015, after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report on residential schools came out, the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation was tasked with creating a registry of names of children who died at residential schools. That was a response to the Commission's call to action number 72, which called for a registry of children who died at the institutions. The National Centre created and released the National Residential School Student Death Register online and in physical form back in 2019, but with a caveat. It acknowledged the list was far from complete, and an extensive amount of work still needs to be done to truly identify all the children who died at residential schools. Today, that message is the same.
As our knowledge increases, as the investigations continue, when we get a better understanding of who was lost and the circumstances of that loss, we will continue to add to that.
So, how do we know that the girl named in the White Bear Treaty Annuity Doc is the same girl who died at Qu'Appelle? Her treaty number 237 was found in an administrative correspondence between the industrial school and the federal Indian agent marking a student's death. The same letter only referred to Letitia as Indian Girl, number 237, from White Bear's band, the White Bear First Nation in modern day. That's how the NCTR was able to identify her on its registry. In another letter found in the federal archives, we found part of the same series of administrative communications about a student's death, where the name Letitia John and treaty number 237 of White Bear's band both appear. In a different federal archive, we found Letitia's death certificate. That document shows student number 0235, Letitia, who was 13 or 14, died of tuberculosis on February 12, 1912 at the Qu'Appelle Industrial School. And it mentions her treaty number was 237 at White Bear. The White Bear documents we have say 2 girls dead in 1912. That's Letitia and her sister. The National Centre says additional correspondences we found are likely part of the archives it already has. But it currently has millions of documents on hand that it's working its way through, compiling a list of children who died in the institutions. I shared news of our findings with White Bear Cree Nation on the eve of the community's first ever National Day for Truth and Reconciliation gathering in 2021.
We come from a place that has much history, and to be able to move forward, we need to address some of that. So it's only fitting that we have this privilege, because of others' research to bring closure.
Identifying and naming those who died at residential schools is important for the chief at the time, Annette Lone Child. She says it makes it more real to know someone's name, instead of just knowing someone may or may not have died in the institutions. Lone Child would like to find Letitia's living family members, but so far, no living family has been located.
But I do believe in the families, and that they know their people and they know who they've left behind. Externally, the systems, the records, might say something different, but I believe in our people and our people's governance. So I don't truly believe anyone's been forgotten.
Finding people tied to a family from over 100 years ago is no easy feat. People who know or remember them die. People move away from home, and various government policies in place between the 1900s and 1950s affected how we identify and are identified even today. While we couldn't find Letitia's family or share her findings with them, we have given Indian Girl 237 a name. And like the NCTR says, the online registry and the banner with the names of children who died in residential schools are living documents that will be updated in the future as more names are found. Brian Enius, CBC Indigenous, Regina.
Some controversial fences have come down from around City Hall and a nearby church in downtown Regina. The fencing at Knox Metropolitan United Church was put up last week after a series of fires on the property, allegedly started by people living on the streets nearby. The church faced criticism from people who said it was blocking people who needed help. Now the church's Board of Trustees says the decision to put up the fences was made without quorum. So this morning, the fences came down.
I expect I'll be recommending that we have a joint meeting with the Board of Trustees and the board, and within the next month, hopefully, meeting of the congregation to talk about what we've been experiencing here at the front steps over the past 4 years and how we might address the issues that that's caused and how we go forward as a church in downtown Regina.
The City of Regina also removed its fencing at City Hall. The barricade was brought in 2 months ago after police cleared out a homeless encampment. City officials have provided various explanations for why the fencing was required, including possible contamination of the grass from dirty needles and repair costs. But now the city says the grass is healed enough to allow people to walk on it.
This weather update is brought to you by Titan Automotive, proud member of the Capital Automotive Group.
And our weather specialist, Ethan Williams, joins me now as we look toward the weekend. Sweater weather?
Yeah, I think you're going to need to add a rain jacket to that, too, because things about to get unsettled. Northern Saskatchewan rain that we've been seeing from this low-pressure system likely continuing tomorrow. Some scattered showers and thunderstorms. Nice clear day for much of us in south and central. That changes come the weekend. This low-pressure system moving through the northern states, bringing through bands of rain, especially for around Regina and kind of eastern sections through the day Saturday into Sunday, and perhaps even a little bit into Monday as well. But again, northern Saskatchewan, we're kind of seeing that ending as we get through the weekend. But for all of us, cloud cover really a theme through the weekend. Now, I think we'll have a better idea this time tomorrow of just how much rain we can expect, but models definitely lining up on kind of a corridor of heavy rain here, including in the Regina area. 44 millimeters of rain might be a little bit of an overshoot, but the 20 to 30 millimeter range probably not to be ruled out, even still around that. A good 5 to 10 millimeters in there as well. So Regina, enjoy tomorrow. It'll be pleasant, and then that rain moves in for the weekend. I've put 10 to 20 millimeters for both Saturday, Sunday, just kind of as a general estimate for now. Rain likely coming to an end sometime on Monday before things clear out and we get some more normal conditions as we head through the rest of the week. Saskatoon, I don't think you'll be as heavily impacted by this. Again, nice day tomorrow. Some cooler temperatures for the weekend, but just around seasonal, maybe 5 millimeters or so there. And then getting to those more seasonal conditions. So we're putting the brakes on summer, Sam, and we're going full fall.
For now.
For now.
Thanks, Ethan.
You bet.
And that is it for us this week. For news anytime, you can head to cbc.ca/sask, check out our YouTube channel, or download the CBC News app. Ethan and I will be back with more local news and weather at 11. Thanks for watching. We are back on Tuesday. Have a great night.